Hello and welcome to our weekly look at what's happening inside Syria. I'm Timor. Now, an international human rights group has accused Syria's military of war crimes, crimes that were allegedly committed while the UN representative Kofi Annan was trying to broker a ceasefire. Now, in a report that they called "They Burned My Heart," Human Rights Watch says there is clear evidence that Syria has breached international law. This during a series of attacks in late March and early April. It says at least 95 civilians were killed during that time. Of these, it says 35 of them were civilians, 3 children, and they say they were executed. All the alleged murders were committed in Idlib Governorate, and they're said to have been carried out by the 76th Armoured Division, backed by army intelligence. Now, Syria's government has not commented on this report, but Damascus has accused foreign-backed groups of waging an armed revolt, which has caused hundreds of deaths. Now, the continuing violence has raised yet more questions about the peace plan that's in place. And now the White House has openly expressed its doubts about the current strategy. Here's spokesman Jay Carney. Now, he says the regime's intransigence continues. The international community is going to have to admit defeat. It's clear, and we will not deny, that the plan has not been succeeding thus far.
The Annan plan is on track. And a crisis that has been going on for over a year is not going to be resolved in a day or a week. Sadly, time is a luxury that we don't have. But realistically, it's going to take a little more time to pull all the strings together. But rest assured that they are being pulled together.
So Ahmad Fawzi, Kofi Annan's spokesman, suggesting that they still have hope in Kofi Annan's camp while the White House is beginning to express its doubts. Let's pick up this latest thread of conversation with our 3 guests today. In Baltimore, Tom Porteous is Deputy Programme Director at Human Rights Watch. In London, Issa is a member of the Syrian Social Club. That's an organisation that advocates for reform in Syria under the current authorities. And joining us from Beirut, Timor Goksel is a former senior advisor and spokesman for the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us. Welcome to the programme. Let me begin with the UN report, and Tim Porteous, since you're with Human Rights Watch, who compiled that report. Let me start with you. And my first question to you is, I mean, in a report that documents a lot of interesting and very specific detail, I just want to ask you a general question, because while the report acknowledges that the area that you studied was pretty much in control of the opposition forces, you don't actually give the opposition forces any voice, rather you don't actually hold the opposition forces accountable for anything at all. Let me actually quote the report. The report says, while both opposition fighters and government soldiers were killed during the operations, this report focuses on violations against the civilian population and nothing more. Why is that?
Just let me make clear that this is not a UN report, as you said. It's a Human Rights Watch report.
Obviously.
But as to your question, we have previously been able to document abuses and violations by the opposition, and we have strongly condemned those abuses, and we've written a letter to the opposition urging them to condemn those abuses, to make sure that they don't happen, and of course those need to be investigated and those responsible need to be held accountable, but they in no way justify the massive violations that are taking place in Syria at the hands of government forces.
Of course not, but I mean the reason I put the question to you is simply this, that in a conflict that is so much characterized by just competing narratives and an absence of information, to have a report like yours in which we get this repeated focus on the words of people who are anti-government does tend to present a situation where you seem to only be blaming the government for what's going on.
Well, actually, most of the words that we quote, the testimonies in the report, are actually the testimonies of ordinary civilians who have been attacked by government forces. Look, access to Syria is extremely difficult. In putting together this report, we were able to get access to Syria for the first time in almost a year. We were in northern Syria for about 5 days, and we followed the leads that we found there, and all the leads pointed to a massive campaign of violence by Syrian government forces and pro-government militias. If we had picked up leads pointing to opposition abuses, we would have focused on those as well. But in the 5 days that we were able to get access to Syria, in the north of Idlib government, near the Turkish border, all the leads pointed to this massive military operation in the days leading up to the ceasefire, when the Assad government was negotiating with the UN.
Issa, all the leads point towards massive violations by the Assad government. How can that government, in all faith, in all good conscience, pretend that it has a part to play in any transition to any future society in Syria?
Well, before I answer your questions, as a group, we are advocates of peace and security for Syria, and we do not support any unjustifiable violence in any form or shape. But when you're looking at this report itself, you're looking at the timing of the reports. You cannot bring a report and start incriminating one side over the other at the time when you have conflicts. Give me peace first, and let's start looking at the incriminations. Secondly, your question, looking at your question, how could this government participate in peace? It is participating in peace. It's offering opposition members to come to the table and put their case forward through dialogue. Now, if you look at this report itself, it is a one-sided report made by from testaments from groups who are either affiliated with the Syrian Free National Army or have a vendetta with the government. Now, all of these testaments are against the government, against the forces of the government. Now, I have not seen, from reading the report, any evidence to substantiate those testaments. And if this was to go to a court of law, it would fail because there is no evidence to substantiate it.
All right. Well, I mean, now, let's assume for a minute that you're right in all of this, and let's just dismiss the Human Rights Watch report for just a moment and pretend that this hasn't been published. Are you seriously denying that the kind of accusations that Human Rights Watch has been making are wrong, because they're being made across the board by a number of well-informed parties? Even Kofi Annan is saying that the Syrian government is carrying out actions that are unjustifiable.
I'm not here to defend the government or to defend the actions. I'm here to speak as an observer from living outside the Syria, but with visual continuous look on the situation in Syria. What I see in Syria is there is a conflict in Syria. What the government is doing, it's trying to defend its constitution. It's trying to defend the structure, the civil structure of the country, and preventing another Iraq crisis. It's preventing a toll of what we reached in Iraq. We reached a toll of over 1 million, according to some reports, where a civil war erupted. Now, this is not the conflict that we want in Syria. We would like a peaceful resolve to this conflict. In reality, if you look again at the report itself and going back to it, there is not even a single documented evidence in that report. Although it talks about the Free Syrian Army as a group which is organized, which then is answerable to the international community, there is not one report about the activities of this group, the intimidation, the killing, the mutilation, the hijacking of innocent civilians.
Okay.
Now,
let me bring in Timor Goksel here, if I could, for a minute. In your work in UNIFIL Goksel, obviously you're very used to dealing with a lot of political confusion, nuance, competing narratives, exactly what we're seeing here. So from your experience and from what you've been seeing in Syria, how do you read the situation as it is now?
Well, I mean, I don't want, as I said, I don't feel qualified, as you are now experiencing yourself. I don't feel qualified to talk about what's actually going on in the country, because I don't trust any of the reports or sources that we hear. It's totally unreliable. But I can only tell you about what I think about the UN situation, which is, I think, very interesting and very critical, and also very, in a way, illiterate about what the UN can do or should do.
Who's being illiterate? Is the UN being illiterate in its role?
No. All the international community, including everybody in New York, whoever is, because everybody is just talking about this thing with no valid plan of action. Certainly there is no plan B that I can see any place. So now the whole world is now being told that, hey, wait, this UN observers that we have now 20-something, and Kofi Annan's plans are going to solve the whole problem. If not, they failed. Excuse me, who said that the UN observers and also Mr. Annan's plan, these are conflict management techniques which are workable ones if they have enough political backing from powers that may be. Now, you don't send the UN observers there to solve the problem. You send them there to reduce the level of violence, minimize the killings, and to minimize the suffering of the civilians. This is what they are there for. But now to get up and say, for any spokesman or anybody else in the world to get up and say, well, these guys are not doing their job, that's very, very unfair, because the expectations that have been created around this mission in Syria are dangerous, because it's not going to work, those expectations. And very soon, it's not going to take a long time, very soon, everybody will gang up against this UN mission.
Do you have
This is what scares me the most in the whole situation.
Can you give us any insight as to why these UN observers are taking so long to arrive? I mean, we saw the Arab League mission sent in 160 observers in a matter of days, and the UN is taking forever.
Look, these are all military people. UN is trying, rightly so, trying to find them, first of all, from the current existing missions all over the world, in the Middle East also. But these are people with families. They have rented houses. They have private obligations. You are telling them they are not ready there for you with their bags ready to move at a moment's notice. These are established officers with permanent assignments someplace at the moment. You are telling them you are trying to uproot them and get them to move in one day. It's impossible. If the guy rented a house in, let's say, in Jerusalem, he has to deal with his landlord. I mean, he has kids in school. I mean, these are all things that will take time.
Right.
And also there's another problem which we don't hear too much about is all these people that the UN tries to find will have to be cleared by the Syrian authorities. That's a part of peacekeeping also. Consent of the host government. They have to give their agreement and visa to anybody you propose.
All right.
If they don't like some of the nationalities,
Sorry to interrupt. Let me bring Tom Porteous back in here again, because one of the things that Timor Goksel mentioned there was the first thing that we are still trying and apparently failing to achieve is some kind of a cessation, or at least a significant lessening in the violence. Now, your report, the Human Rights Watch report, contains within it a series of suggestions, it says here, recommendations rather, directed at the Syrian government. At the the UN Security Council, at the Arab League, and specifically it points at, or it picks out, Russia and China. And I'll quote you the recommendation that it offers to Russia and China, quote, suspend all military sales and assistance to the Syrian government, given the real risk that weapons and technology will be used in the commission of serious human rights violations. Now, again, as a standalone suggestion, that may well have a certain amount of sense. But why does your report not also have a similar recommendation directed towards the international community? Surely the international community's arming of the opposition forces, who have themselves declared they're not interested in negotiating with Assad, is as much of a barrier to a ceasefire as Russia and China are.
Look, I mean, there's no doubt that the overwhelming power in Syria still lies with the Syrian regime. But you know, I agree with the previous speaker when he says that people are trying to undermine the UN peace plan without having any plan B, as it were. The Annan plan is certainly the best chance there is at the moment to end the horrific abuses and violations that are taking place in Syria, and that's our main concern. But the window of opportunity is very small. There needs to be, at the same time as this plan unfolds, there needs to be extremely concerted pressure on Syria to abide by the plan, to respect the 6 points of the plan, and Russia and China are the two international actors who can best do that at the moment, because the European Union and the United States, they don't have that much.
Let me put that same point back to Timor Goksel again.
They don't have that much influence. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you say they don't have that much influence. Timor Goksel, we heard Joe Lieberman only yesterday saying, expressing his concern that countries in the region and around the world are not doing enough to back the Syrian opposition. So let me put it to you. Wouldn't the Syrian government be under more moral obligation to stop its violence if it saw the international community putting the same pressure on the opposition as it does on the Syrian government?
Obviously, but look, there is one thing we are overlooking here. We are forgetting that this is a conflict that has been a very violent one, very bloody one for more than a year. Both sides have taken extreme positions. Now, are we sure that these both sides, in this case, are ready for a solution? Because imagine if you are in the case of the opposition, who have already risen up against this government, this state, for all these practices. They have taken up arms, which is a very serious crime in any country in the world, certainly in Syria. Mm. And now we are telling them, no, lay down your weapons and go and talk. But can you give them minimal guarantees what is going to happen to them if we reach a peace solution tomorrow? All right, well, let me have to think about their future also.
Let me put that one question to Issa. Is the Assad government ready for any kind of a ceasefire here? Because most people seem to believe, and the evidence seems to suggest, that they're not. Well,
this is not true. The Syrian government has withdrawn its military from the roads, from the cities. There is
that's not entirely true, is it?
But there is still a conflict in certain areas where armed oppositions are still terrorizing innocent civilians, and the role of the Syrian government is to uphold the security and the safety of the public. Now, today we had another terrorist act which was committed in Syria, in Damascus. I don't see anybody condemning this terrorist acts. The Syrian government has a duty to all of its citizens to uphold the peace and the security of the country. Now, there are small minority groups that are holding arms, terrorizing people, preventing them from going on about their own daily jobs, killing also innocent civilians, just because they don't want anything to do with this so-called revolution, or they don't want to be affiliated with the revolution. They don't want to go out holding arms with the Free Syrian Army.
But I mean, you're not really answering my question. I'm sorry to interrupt. You're not really answering the question. I mean, what evidence is there to suggest that the Assad regime is in any way willing or able to participate in anything that even approaches a ceasefire and a transition to a normal society?
Well, you had the new constitution. Now you have elections in a day, but also the withdrawal of the military. You do not see on the roads of Syria, and if you look at Damascus, it's a city that does not have military vehicles on the roads, as it is being reported by many of the media.
Right, well, that's Damascus. What about all the cities in Idlib that Human Rights Watch has been talking about? Tom, let me come back to you. From what your observers in the Idlib governorate saw, is the idea of an election at all workable? I mean, from what I've been reading in your report, there is no infrastructure to support any possibility of a reasonable election.
No, and the Syrian government forces, from what the evidence that we were able to gather there, can only control that area through extreme violence. But I must come back and challenge the assertion of your Syrian guest, because you know, this crisis in Syria started with massive peaceful demonstrations against the Syrian government, which were brutally suppressed over many weeks and months from March, April last year. The arming of the opposition only took place after extreme provocation, after acts of what we described and documented as crimes against humanity, the opening fire by security forces on peaceful demonstrators,
well, I mean,
massive
sorry to stop you there, Tom. We're running out of time. But I mean, that narrative we've heard many times before, and it's one that has been contradicted.
But I'm sorry, but this
is
is continuing now since the ceasefire just in the last week. The Syrian government has closed down Aleppo University and has responded to peaceful demonstrations by university students in Aleppo, which at one point was seen as a stronghold of government support. The question of who started it and whether they're right or wrong is not really going to take us anywhere forward at this stage. Timor Goksel, what can the UN do now? Kofi Annan has pretty much done everything he can, hasn't he? Are there any other options available?
Well, no, not for the UN as an organization, but as for the membership, I don't know what they are doing except talking. I think Kofi Annan, who knows this region quite well, he has very good staff who are very experienced in this region also. I think they have a good credibility in Syria, and I believe with both sides. Yes, there are a lot of things they can do, and I do also believe, I agree with their spokesman Ahmed Fawzi, that there has been a perceptible decrease in level of violence. It's not ended, but there has been a decrease. I agree with them. This is a very slow process. You have 24 to 30 observers on the ground. You have to spread these 300 people to all the conflict points, the flash points in the country. This takes time because they are not there. So, I mean, once you have this UN presence on the ground, I'm sure we are going to see a considerable reduction in level of violence and of the suffering of the people. But again, as I said, it's not going to end the problem. It's not these people on the ground who's going to solve this crisis. Somebody, someplace else, has to start working on this. There are other options. There are a lot of other sanctions that the UN can impose. Of course, we need Russia and China on board on this one. But as I said to you before, is this situation ripe for a solution? You are asking both sides to give such major concessions that they might not be ready to give at the moment because of the consequences. For the opposition to give up their arms and then face the future, the music that they will face, unless they are adequately assured. And then you're asking the state, with the same plan, to give up its sovereignty, its control over certain population areas. These are very heavy concessions. Unless you can back them up with some political action, you are not going to get it, I'm afraid.
Coming to the end of the show, I'll just give one final word to Issa Shaer. What do you think a viable end game would look like in this scenario?
A viable end game is to give dialogue a chance to for all the parties to put their arms down and look at the future of Syria
by
as
a viable
whole.
end game, I mean, how much do you think that President Assad is willing to change the existing regime? How much power is he willing to give up in order to achieve peace in his country?
Well, he would have to. The aspiration of the Syrian people is to have a reform that is sustainable, and for all the political parties to take part in running the country. And I think President Assad is now thinking very seriously about the future of Syria, trying to involve every single faction in Syria. I think there is a future for dialogue. There is a future for peace in Syria.
And we are well out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Issa Shaer joining us there from London, Timor Goksel in Beirut, and also we had Tom Porteous of Human Rights Watch joining us from the United States. Well, as we mentioned there, the elections in Syria are due to happen on May the 7th. So by the time we join you on this programme again next week, there'll be plenty more to talk about. In the meantime, thanks very much indeed for watching. If you want to catch this show again online, just go to our website, aljazeera.com. But for the moment, from me and from the team, it's goodbye for now.